NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles was there at that briefing. Ryan, what did you take out of that?
Well, Willie, I think the most important thing that came out of these remarks from Hunter Biden is that he clearly stated in a public forum, really for the first time, that his father was not in any way, shape, or form connected to any of his professional life, his legal career, his foreign business dealings, even his art career, which there's even been accusations from Republicans that his entire art career was just a setup as a way for Biden campaign donors to support him in that way, shape, or form. So he did say that, and he said it emphatically. But I do have to say that one of the things that Republicans are going to do to counter him stating that on the record is that he's not doing it under oath in a setting in front of these members of Congress that have serious questions for him and under subpoena. So there's really no chance that this press conference is going to help him in terms of his efforts to avoid a contempt of Congress charge. And, you know, just to kind of explain to you the way that these congressional investigations often work, it is pretty typical for congressional investigators to call witnesses before them first in a closed-door deposition in a setting where there are not cameras, where there are not an opportunity for political grandstanding, where they can ask very specific questions on very specific topics. Often these depositions are very lengthy and often very dry. And then it is those depositions that then end up setting up the public hearings. That's exactly the way the January 6th Select Committee conducted business when they did their investigation into the events around the Capitol insurrection. So that is not out of the ordinary. But to the point that Hunter Biden made here just a few minutes ago, the chairman of the committee, of the Oversight Committee, James Comer, has said on more than one occasion that he just wanted Hunter Biden in front of them and that he was willing to do that behind closed doors or to do it in a public setting. And he reversed course once they issued that subpoena. Now, the question that will linger based on the way that Hunter Biden has responded to this subpoena today is how Congress will react. Now, they set the terms of the subpoena. Hunter Biden and his lawyers don't get the opportunity to set the terms of the subpoena. That's Congress's power. And the terms of their subpoena clearly stated that they wanted him to appear in a closed-door deposition. So it is very likely that the next step in this process will be Congress holding him in contempt. And that would mean and that's something that would have to be voted on by the entire House of Representatives. If it passes the entire House of Representatives, it would then land in the lap of Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, to decide whether or not to prosecute that case. Does it end up going to the special counsel David Weiss? That's also a possibility, but that would be another legal headache for Hunter Biden on top of the mounting legal woes he's already facing with these multiple indictments, the tax charges in California, and of course the gun charges that he's facing in Delaware. So this is going to make his situation that much more complicated. And what we saw here today was this was a public relations effort here to try and counter these Republican claims that they've been making very much in a vacuum without much of an answer by Hunter Biden. This was his opportunity to state publicly for the record how he felt about this, the way that this process was playing itself out. But to be clear, it's not going to change the potential legal steps that could happen after this or the way that House Republicans are going to respond to the way he is responding to their subpoena here today.
Ryan, it's certainly also part of a more aggressive PR tactics taken by Hunter Biden and his lawyer there, Abbe Lowell. We had him on the show earlier this week, and we should reiterate that there has been no evidence at all presented by Republicans that President Biden had anything to do with his son's business dealings. But that's not, of course, limiting the personal toll this is taking on the president or limiting what the Republicans are trying to do with their investigation. So give us an update as to where else this is going. I know that a subpoena was also issued to the president's brother. Where else are they trying to go with this this particular probe?
It's a great question, Jonathan. And the first thing we should point out is that in addition to everything that's happening here with Hunter Biden today, there's a significant step that's about to be taken by House Republicans in terms of the overall impeachment inquiry. They are set to formalize the impeachment inquiry, which was already launched under the former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy without a vote of the House. They intend to formalize that today, and it does appear that there are enough Republican votes to make that step happen. Now, the reason that that is significant is part part of the argument that Abby Lowell, Hunter Biden's attorney, has made as it relates to this subpoena is that the subpoena is not legitimate because it had yet to be formalized for the entire House. Well, they're going to do that this afternoon. And part of what they're also going to do is pass a separate resolution that essentially grandfathers in the work of the impeachment inquiry, which would include the subpoena that they issued of Hunter Biden underneath the banner of this new impeachment inquiry. And so I don't think there's any doubt that the indictment that was leveled against Hunter Biden last week, all the salacious charges that are associated with it, does give many of these moderate Republicans that are in Biden-held districts a degree of cover to say, well, I'm not ready to vote on articles of impeachment, which is a whole additional step. But it does give them the ability to say, hey, look at all this evidence that's out there. We need to give and empower our congressional investigators the opportunity to look into this even more. And by formalizing that impeachment inquiry, that will give them just more ground to stand on. So that is a significant step. And then the other thing, the point I'll make about that, guys, is that it also is a political risk, though, for Republicans, right? Because we know definitively that there are not enough votes for the articles of impeachment. If this now puts the investigation on steroids, and if they're unable to deliver that evidence, of which they have not, Jonathan is 100% right. There is not concrete evidence that Joe Biden was in any way, shape, or form involved in his son's business dealings, or that he used his influence as a political leader to help his business dealings. If they're unable to deliver those goods and are unable to push articles of impeachment over the finish line, in many ways that could exonerate the president, and that political move that they're making could backfire. Wow. So there's a lot on the line today after this impeachment inquiry vote today.
NBC Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles, thank you very much.